Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the November CQC Public Board meeting. I don't think we have any apologies. Do we have anything anybody needs to declare? Any interest we need to declare? Okay, that's good. As you know, we have a representative from one of our equality networks at every meeting. Farah Islam-Barrett, who is the co-chair of our Race Equality Network, is here today. Farah, you've been before, so you're welcome again. Nice to see you here. Thank you for coming. I think that deals with the preliminaries, takes us straight into the minutes of the meeting of the 16th of October. Are they a true and accurate record of everything we discussed? Good, so they are approved. In the action log, there are a number of items that are not yet due, so we just note that they're there. That's fine. Ian?
Peter, there was an action at the last board meeting where we received a letter from David Noble in relation to an independent review that he's doing into our 2015 review at Walton Hall. The expectation was that he would present his report to the board at this meeting. However, due to the pre-election period, we are unable to take the report at this meeting because there are restrictions on all public bodies, as you will appreciate, on the types of material that can be presented in public. So David's report will be deferred until our next public board meeting after the conclusion of the pre-election period. So in real terms, I would expect that would probably be our January meeting, subject to a government being in place at our January meeting.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, it's worth saying that it's extremely disappointing that we're in this position, but it is as you say. And I think just worth also saying that we set dates for December and January board meetings every year because you don't know what business there will be. But we normally aim to cancel the January meeting because the working time elapsed between December and January isn't that great. This year we're reversing it, so there isn't a meeting in December. But there will be a meeting in January anyway, and hopefully the further restrictions won't still be applying. But it is disappointing that we've not been able to receive that report as we had expected today. Right. Was there anything else arising? Anybody wanted to raise? John?
Could I just clarify? We did ask the DHSC whether we were able to publish that report.
We had very strong advice that we were not able to publish the report. Yeah. Right. On to the executive team report, please.
Thanks, Peter. I think one of the main things that I did this month was that I joined a number of colleagues in Parliament, and we presented to parliamentarians and to members of the House of Lords on our State of Care report. As you know, our State of Care report is our annual review of what we believe the state of care in health and social care is. I think that was a successful event, as always. Lots of interest from those present. We also this year we co-hosted it with a parliamentary group as well, which again brought in other people into the room which meant we were able to spread some of the messages. So I think that was a successful event. I've got nothing else, Peter. If I could hand over to Kate. Thank you.
Not you, Kate?
Sorry.
Sorry. Right, Ted.
Okay, thank you. So just to update on in my report on the work we're doing on regulation of caring closed environments, following Walton Hall and our interim report on the RSS restrictive practices report. So since last board meeting, we have published our guidance on inspecting closed environments. That's been well received by inspectors and is being used on the grounds. That guidance emphasised the importance of a human rights approach And of course that was reinforced with the report that came out from the Joint Committee on Human Rights, which drew heavily on our interim report and came forward with some further suggestions of how we can tighten up our inspection protocols. And we'll obviously be looking at that going forward in the work we're doing, building on what we've learned so far, but also the findings and recommendations of the 2 independent reports that are in progress. We've just discussed one of them, and we clearly will incorporate that into the work we're doing. Last week, there was the second of the expert stakeholder summits from the RSS review in Bristol, which was organised by the British Institute of Learning Disabilities. And that really was well attended, and I thought very, very interesting in some of the suggestions coming forward. We'll be building that and the advice from our expert advisory report into the report that we'll be publishing, the final report we'll be publishing in March of next year. I think I take away from that the importance and what I said at the event, a strong commitment to the people there, that it is important that this report, when it comes out, is not just another report that says, that describes the very unsatisfactory care provided in some of these environments, but a report that is really going to make a difference. And as we come to looking at the recommendations we're going to make in that report, I think it's very important we focus on what recommendations are really going to change the circumstances that leads to these restrictive practices and what we've seen in these various reports. Can I also highlight that we'll be publishing shortly the survey on the community patients experiencing community mental health services. That's something we publish on a regular basis, and there are interesting findings this year that will be published in the next couple of weeks' time.
Good. Thanks, Ted. Liz?
Thank you. I just wanted to welcome both the revised guidance and the process that's ongoing, including the event that was the summit hosted by the British Institute for Learning Disabilities, and really to support what Ted just said about the importance of our recommendations being quite specific for particular who exactly needs to do what exactly to make sure that action really happens and that it's tracked and that there's accountability. Because at the moment, there are a number of people raising huge concerns about these issues for people and people's human rights. So that there's an alignment there, there's an opportunity for some real change to happen, and I think we need to really sort of seize that opportunity. I've just got one question, if I may, which is our review into restrictive practices does touch on the experience of people with mental health conditions as well as people with learning disabilities and autism. And I just wondered whether what process we will have for looking at the recommendations kind of with a big focus on people with learning disabilities and autism, but also widening it out, if you like, to anybody who might be experiencing restrictive practice in health and care.
Thank you, Liz, and I'm grateful for your support. I think it's important that we do make this report really count and make a difference, not just for people with learning disabilities and autism. I mean, they've been a strong focus, but for all people who are cared for in closed environments where restrictive practices are used, to make sure that they're not used inappropriately, and focusing on the human rights of people involved. So yes, the report must cover all that.
Robert?
I also welcome what's being done and the information that's come out. Can I just ask about this, bearing in mind that these closed environments are places, we, by definition, have people who come from a long way from where the place is. What advice there is or could be given in relation to how you make sure that if someone, for instance, a relative makes a complaint in Cornwall in relation to a place in the north of England, that the information gets from one place to the other, because it's rather different from the normal situation around a hospital or a care home or a GP practice or something like that. So how are we dealing with that, and how would you expect others to deal with it?
Well, certainly if issues are raised with us, then even if they're raised by someone in Cornwall, we can take it up with our team in, say, the north of England, where the individual may actually be. So I think that's an issue. But there clearly is an issue around commissioning of these services, and often the commissioners are a long way away from these services. And I think one of the characteristics of these environments often is that the people in the service are often commissioned by lots of different commissioners, and so there's no one oversight commissioning. And I think that's something we will want to look at in our report. How do we bring that together? So the oversight, not just from us as the regulator, but on a daily basis from the commissioners and other people involved in the care of these patients, is sufficient to focus on the overall picture of care in that organisation.
Anything else on the report? Shall we move on to the performance report? Chris, I'm not sure whether this has been communicated to you, but Kirsty and I agreed that we'd start with you, and then while you're just getting ready, and then obviously to Kirsty. But what I suggest that we do as a board, when we've had any introductory remarks from Chris and Kirsty, is actually just turn the pages of the slides one by one. And the reason I want to do that is there's a massive amount of really good stuff in here where we've made a lot of progress, and we should celebrate that. But there are also some areas where we are still behind target, and I think I'd like to understand what the plan is to get us back onto target, so the path to success. So have I talked long enough, Chris, to get you ready? The microphone.
Yeah, having a few connection problems here. Sorry about that. So yeah, this is the Q2 performance report, taking us up to performance for September. There's registration performance of new variation refusals is improved in September, with cancellations dipping. The performance of registrations is now declining before against performance, and we anticipate this will get worse as the remainder of the year goes on. Sorry, I wasn't really prepared for this. Inspections in PMS and hospitals continue to deliver commitments. Over 90% of inspections within KPI. Requires improvement inspection. PMS has dropped to 79% in the month of September. ASC continue to deliver inadequate and requires improvements inspections within KPI. But return to good and outstanding drop below KPI this month. Other things to pull out, key bits. Safeguarding alerts stood at 100% against a target of 95%, which constantly be achieved this year. Concerns requiring mandatory actions within 5 days continue to increase, bringing year-to-date performance nearer to target of 91%. Reports, 89% of reports being published within KPI, nearing target of 90%. ASA and PMS continue performing above target. Hospital performance improved steadily throughout Q2, but 56 reports published in KPI in September, second highest this year. On finance, I'll say a few words on finance. Concerns early in the year about financial position. We had an overspend and we're projecting an overspend for the end of the year. We're currently underspent now following action we've taken in our executive team. We have 2.7 million underspend and projecting a 0.2 million variance at the end of the year. They're probably the highlights to pull out and to pass it over to others to comment on.
So just on the finance, I think it's not quite at the end of the year yet. So, but I think it's a really good example of knowing where we were, taking early action, and if you are within a couple of 100,000 at the end of the year, plus or minus, on a budget north of 100 million, that's a really good achievement. So congratulations to you, Chris, for driving the team to take the necessary action to get back on track. Let's, because is there anything you want to add at this stage?
No. I think we're just going to flip through
We are. Yeah, we are. So if we go to slide 4, which is the first one, I think, where we're talking about registration, and I mean, obviously, there's a huge amount of work going on in registration, but we are behind performance on every level.
So just on registration, there is a lot of work going on. So registration, there is an awful lot of work going on. What we have done in registration is we have changed our operating model slightly, in that we have split out operations and quality assurance under sort of 2 separate teams. So in terms of the operations piece now, we are starting to look at this end to end. We've got a big piece of work that we're doing to understand what our backlog is in registration, and what we're doing now is focusing on clearing down some older applications, which is meaning that our performance is taking a dip because we're trying to get on top of that backlog that has built up. We are reorganising ourselves and managing work now according to risk, and also trying to get this backlog down, which will mean that over between now and the last quarter of this year, we expect to see performance dip slightly as we start to address this. We are looking at developing some new KPIs so that we can start to separate out the complexity around registration. At the moment, one KPI is covering all activities. It doesn't distinguish between the more complex ones that take longer and the shorter ones that we can do quickly. So we are starting to look at that. And I'm very confident that from April, under the new KPIs, we'll see a real improvement in performance. So I think if I could just ask people to bear with us whilst we address some of these issues that we have discovered and are now surfacing and addressing in a really consistent, in a concentrated and consistent way to really drive up performance for the longer term.
Okay, John.
Thank you, Kirsty. When we looked at these previously, I was reassured that the refusal rate was coming down, which was consistent with the new way of working and doing things differently, and that ultimately the others' figures would start to follow. What disconcerts me about this set of figures is the rise in the refusal rate, which seems to indicate that the attempts to have people do the forms in advance properly, etc., may not be quite working to plan.
So I think that this is another one of the issues with the set of slides is that they're not terribly clear. So the refusal rate, the yellow line at the bottom, is actually how long it takes us to progress to deliver a refusal, not the number of refusals. So actually on that slide it's getting better. But what we if you look at the refusal rate on the slides, I'm not sure if we've got them on here, but you'll see that we have made massive improvement on our refusal rates. We've gone from, I think off the top of my head, they were about 34% on average in terms of applications were refused. We've now got that down to, I think off the top of my head, it's around 18%. I'll look at it and confirm in a minute. So we've done a big QI program around refusals, and we have made real improvement.
That was my understanding, so my apologies for misinterpreting the graph.
Okay, so
just to add that, I think what Kirsty and I have been talking about is how to create a set of measures for the board that do reflect that much more nuanced position that Kirsty was describing. Because I think actually this graph probably doesn't reflect the experience of people who are trying to be registered, whereas there's a set of numbers that Kirsty and the team are working on, which I think will give us a much more sensible view, and we'll be able to answer the sorts of questions from the slide that John was just asking.
So if we then go on to about 3 slides further on, which if it's got a number on it, I can't see it, but PMS inspections return to rating. We've got a mistake in here.
No, since this was raised at the board the last time, we've been doing a deep dive into this across the directorate. And if I could divide this into kind of internal factors and external factors, we have identified a number of internal factors that we are working on to improve, which have included issues with scheduling, oversight and capacity, issues with ratings not being pulled through and breaches not being closed, which is more of a data issue rather than an actual issue, which we're dealing with. We've had some issues that have identified that some locations have ceased trading and providing regulated activities because we've taken action, but then the registration processes haven't been completed, so another data issue. We've identified that some of the teams were not clear about the rules around returning to requires improvement with one inadequate within 6 months, and we've dealt with that. We've sent out communications around that, and there was also some an issue about the impact of enforcement and how that works with returns. So all of those issues that we've identified are being worked through. We're putting in plans in place to deal with those, and the teams are working on that at the moment. I guess the other thing that we need to mention here is that some of the factors related to this are external factors. So we work hand in hand with our local CCG partners, and in some cases the CCG might say to us, can you leave an inspection for a month or so before you come in because of various factors, and we work with our partners to work out what the best time is to go back in, so that does have an impact as well. And we anticipate actually that these are very, very small numbers, and we anticipate, for example, in January there will be a specific slight dip because we've been asked, related to a complex provider where some of our inadequate practices are related to another provider, we've been asked to delay those inspections for a month or two to line it up with some of the kind of other trusts in the area. So there's a variety of complex reasons, but we are taking action on all of those, and we have a much better understanding of the situation now.
And I now have a better understanding of RI is not what I thought it was, the combination of RI and I, which actually meant that the slide didn't add up. It's actually a category. Thank you. So I've learned something. Excellent. Brilliant. Paul.
Thank you. Can I ask a sort of related question to the slide, which is when you look at the outstanding and good, and the good ones in particular, I guess, because we've done 320 inspections of good ones, is that right? The results of those inspections, do we, in terms of maintaining the ratings, do we know what that shows in terms of whether there's any sort of decline overall?
Yes, we're seeing a huge movement actually in the ratings across primary medical services, and in our good and outstanding practices we are seeing about 17% deterioration in those good and outstanding practices to requires improvement or inadequate. So there is quite a movement. We're seeing movement the other way, so our inadequate and requires improvement practices are improving, and there's a whole range of reasons for that. I think firstly we know, which we outlined in the State of Care report, we know that there's huge increase in demand and huge capacity issues across general practice at the moment. We know that there's workforce shortages and pressures from that point of view, and we also know that there's a lot of changes because in the primary care landscape, practices are emerging. Some practices are taking over failing practices, and that can have a short-term impact on their ratings. So there is a lot of change, and I can provide you with the detailed breakdown of that change in deterioration if it would be helpful, or change in ratings.
I mean, the reason I raise that is that in the past we've kind of had a overall rating of good and better of 65% or so. If that's kind of declining down, then that kind of means we need to have a think about what the implications are.
So the current good and outstanding is 95%. It's about 90, and actually that's dropped very slightly. But I think, and one of the key messages we said in the State of Care report was actually congratulations to the system, because despite all of those challenges and despite all of the changes that are happening, they've still managed to maintain that quality. We're working very closely. We're working with our partner agencies to look at how we can work with other organisations to make sure that we support practices that need additional help and support when they are struggling.
Okay, so if we then turn the page to ASC, Kate, you've clearly rightly been concentrating on returning to the RI and the inadequate, but that's been at the expense of the outstanding and good?
So that has been an intentional plan through the year to take a risk-based approach to how we prioritise our inspections. However, performance has improved notably during October. So we were down to about 70% within KPI of return to good in September. We're up to 89% in October. And drilling down into that, 3 of my regions, so London, Central and North, are well into the 90s. We have some particular challenges in the South region, so they're at about 77% of return to good ratings, and this translates to some real challenges around recruitment and retention within the patch. So we currently have 11 inspector vacancies in the South, 6 of which we've recruited to, but they haven't started yet. And when we get to a conversation about turnover, I also have notably higher turnover rates within the South region as well. This has been recognised, and the piece of work that Jill Nicholson's leading on around our people, thinking about our kind of people strategy, the issue that I think a number of us across the Directorate's experience around recruitment and retention, particularly in the South East, will be focused on. But returning to this, yes, there's improved performance within October with a risk-based approach to which inspections we are bringing forward to make sure we are targeting our efforts effectively. So.
Good, thanks. And Ted, you're about as on target as is feasibly possible to be, I would suggest.
Yes, we are. Just a couple of points I'll make on the back of that, though. This reflects a lot of hard work from the frontline inspection teams, and I'd just like to pay tribute for them for delivering this. This is in the context of the tight financial planning that we've had, that we discussed, where we've achieved financial targets as well. So I think I'm doubly proud of the work they've done there. But just behind this, just to focus that I suppose moving forward into the new financial year, I would like a bit more headroom in the inspection teams to focus more on risk, to be more reactive, rather than to be just timetabled in. And I think one of the things we need to move forward from is a very timetabled approach. Is we go back after so many times, depending on the rating, to one where we can be more responsive. In truth, at the moment, we are doing more responsive inspections than previously, and that's been included in this, which I think is encouraging. But I think we need to be more fleet of foot, and one of the recommendations of the JCHR report was we need to be more fleet of foot. Now we need to create that headroom in our timetabling to do that.
Which no doubt we'll discuss in more detail at an appropriate time. But I mean, in broad terms, that's entirely consistent with an intelligence-driven approach. So, yeah, I'm sure we would, in general terms, be supportive. Okay, then. Just turning the pages, there's a slide on the percentage inspections undertaken based on new information, which I think is self-explanatory. And then there's a slide on enforcement action. Rebecca, is there anything you can say about why we're ending up with any enforcement action that's out of the KPI? I mean, are there good reasons for this? I'm sorry, you haven't got a microphone. It's one way to keep you and Ted quiet.
I think probably where you have things outside KPI, it will be because an issue arises which is at the margin of the statutory risk of harm test, and it requires a longer process to establish basically the level of urgency. So sometimes I think these cases are clear cut, but sometimes they're not, and we may have to have more than one visit, for example. So it may reflect an inspection, but then we've had a timetabling going back to gather further evidence and information. I think that's probably what the picture shows.
And while you've got a microphone, if you go on to the next slide, there's outcomes of enforcement action. Some are successful, some are unsuccessful, and then there's a category in the middle that says other. And I wondered what came between success and failure.
I actually can't help you on that one. I did wonder the same thing myself. But I think some of the... I
mean, is it the point you were making a minute ago?
Yes, and
Yeah.
I think also because these show outcomes, they don't show when the issue started. So you have some cases where if we're not taking action that's urgent action, you'll have some cases where you start a case but it hasn't finished. So if you looked at September and you've got that figure 54, those might be cases which if we come to November, December, actually they would be concluded and the figure would look different. But some of this is rolling activity, so I'm not sure whether the other is stuff which is in the middle and hasn't concluded. I need to talk to Steph about that.
It would be, it would be helpful
Yeah.
if at our next board meeting
Yes.
we could all understand what it means.
The
And
other thing I do
yeah,
know is that
yeah.
Steph has done a lot of work to rethink how we are classifying things as successful
Yeah.
or not successful, which I think will be helpful in the future.
So, I mean, if it's just that we haven't got an outcome yet, then
Yeah.
that's perfectly
Yeah.
understandable. John?
Rebecca, if I could just go back to the enforcement action undertaken within 3 days for urgent enforcement and the 32% that are outside KPI, and you've given us an impression of why you think that is the case. I mean, in reality, that's hundreds of people who are in places we don't think they should be in, or receiving care that we don't think they should be receiving. Is there any sense of you looking at that with a root cause analysis to actually see what is going on there?
Kate, do you want to come in at that point?
So if I can endeavour to answer this, but I might need to come back to kind of make this a bit more concrete. So I think this is about our inspectors are taking action in a timely way, but what they are doing is they are not going through the process that we've established for them. So my understanding is when there's a need to take enforcement action, there's a process by which the NCSC, the National Contact Centre, actions something on the inspector's behalf. The inspectors aren't going through that route and therefore it's not being recorded and hitting KPI. What they're doing is it might be a Friday evening, they're wanting to take action and inform the provider there and then, and they're going the direct route, which is telling the provider directly. So I think we've had this discussion before where we've all sought assurances that our staff are taking the action they need to in a timely way to ensure people are safe, but our process is more clunky than it needs to be, so things aren't getting recorded. And I think there's a specific piece of work with Joyce in registration to make this process slicker. But I just want to assure the board that we've done the piece of work that says, can we be assured that our staff are taking enforcement action in a timely way and keeping people safe, and we have received that assurance, but our systems aren't reflecting that. That's what I think it is.
Kirsty.
Yes, so I can agree. I can support that assumption that we are doing some work to look at the sort of how we close these out to make sure that our data catches up with the actions that we've currently got. And there's a bit of a project to look at how we record better and whether we do need to use NCSC in this space, or we can actually look at whether it can just be done by inspectors. But actually the key thing is to make sure that we are actually lining the data up with the activity, and that's what we're looking at.
Liz?
Yes, thanks. I mean, I think it would be useful to keep an eye on this in the board, but also just to say that in the Regulatory Governance Committee we have got in our forward plan timetabled a more in-depth deep dive and looking at enforcement overall. I think from memory that's not till March, so we need to keep an eye on this before that, but we can certainly after that report back to the board as well on the overall position on enforcement.
Thank you very much. That's reassuring, Kate, so thank you. Sorry, I thought, Mark, you were just... No. Okay, so move on. Safeguarding alerts, brilliant, 100%. Well done, everybody on that. Oh, my machine's gone mad. And then, Ian, want to say something? No. Then we've got the report timescales for publication. Clearly, PMS doing incredibly well.
Well, actually, Peter.
Sorry, John. Gone too fast.
Not wishing to at all disagree with my chairman, of course, but
you don't have to disagree.
but not willingly. But the run chart, and I haven't got it in big enough scale to be absolutely certain about this. So I'm deferring to Rose's analysis. but it looks to me as though there has been a slight system worsening over the past few months rather than just month-on-month variation. And I wonder if you could just comment whether I'm right or wrong.
Yes, and it's very astute, because actually when we see the report next month, actually we have got a dip in the October performance. There is a dip, sadly, under KPI to 88% with our report timescales. I think this is probably multifactorial. So firstly, our teams have been under huge pressure this year, but for a variety of reasons. One being the introduction of the annual regulatory review process, which is a good process to have a more regular review of what's happening within practices. But initially that certainly was triggering more inspections than we anticipated. So we have done significantly more inspections over the last few months than we anticipated in the business plan. There also is some data issues in here which actually are kind of complicating the factor, and we've been doing some data cleansing which has identified a problem that has shown that actually whilst we've published the report on the website, so actually from a public point of view it's not made any difference because the report has been available, but there's been an issue with closing it off on digital publisher or a data quality issue, which is part of this. But I think it is probably a multifactorial problem. We are aware of it and we are looking into it. So thank you.
I think, John, it was you that was pushing us to have this run rate trend data. So thank you. On to hospitals. I mean, good progress, Ted. It just occurred to me it would be helpful to start having some data around the letters, because that's a really important initiative in hospitals, and it's not actually in our data here.
No, we don't report here on the letters, but as you know, in order to make sure that issues are raised in a timely way, we do write feedback letters to trusts and ask them to discuss them at their public boards, so that they are in the public domain. We have made some progress here, but it's month-on-month progress. I think John's looking at me, and I shall say straight away, if you look at the run chart, I am not sure we've changed the game yet. So I'm not going to claim that we've turned the corner on this. There is a now well-established quality improvement programme looking at this work, and there's a lot of things that it is doing. First of all, learning from some of my colleagues in the other directorates, it is about simplifying the report structure, because I think our reports are unnecessarily complex, and people will say that they are very repetitive, and I think that's a fair comment in many ways. We've tried to make them all things to all people, and I think we just need to simplify them. The other thing that they're looking at is the evidence appendix, because as those of you who have seen our reports will know, that there's a summary report which is relatively short, not very short, but relatively short, and often a very long evidence appendix, which has all the evidence behind the report in it. And we feel we can simplify the evidence appendix. We need that evidence to back up our report, but we don't need necessarily to publish it in a narrative form in the way we do at the moment. We're also looking at the quality assurance arrangements to make sure they're effective but not over time consuming, and I think there's work to do on that. And just to come back to something Rosie was talking about in terms of the digital publisher, we're doing work on that as well, because there are sometimes delays caused by problems with digital publisher right at the time we publish, which sometimes can take add a few days or a week or so to the report timeliness. So I think there's a whole series of things we're focusing on at the moment. I am confident they will make a big difference, and that work is progressing quite at a pace.
So just on the letters, I mean, I would like to know, firstly, that we are hitting the target of getting letters out within 2 weeks, but then secondly, that we get confirmation that at the next available public board meeting the trust has made it available, because fundamentally that letter is for the public, and if it's not made available to them, then it's lost its purpose.
We will bring a report back on that, Peter.
John.
Ted, thank you for making the point that I was going to make to you. But as you know, we've raised this issue since I've been on the board, and this is becoming a bit like the waiting for Godot chart. If I'm being a little unkind, that when we talked previously, in the year. You gave us a date of July that things would start to pick up. So what is the new date that you expect the work, which I know is going on, will actually make us see a system change?
Well, you're right, John, that that we were hoping to turn it around earlier on, and we made some progress, but that was not sustained, I think, with the weight of work, which I had reported earlier on. I think the work going on at the moment will make a difference because we are taking a much more systematic, quality improvement approach to it. I am cautious about giving you a timescale. It's certainly be my ambition that we would get there by the end of the financial year, but I think we're coming back to the Audit Committee in February. So can I bring back a very firm proposal at that stage?
Yes, there's a reason it's February.
So, bad analogy. I think Waiting for Godot is the only play where I didn't make it back after the interval for the second half. I will be here for February.
So you missed the denouement.
I wasn't where there was one, but anyway. Right, moving swiftly on. Kate, looks to me as if you might have a modest uptick. I mean, need a magnifying glass to see it right at the end of your trend analysis. But anyway, it's good performance.
So we have a modest uptick in September and then a slight modest downtick in October. So our October figures are 89%. But you'll note for a good period of time, for about 6 months or so, we've been hovering around that 90% mark. The average of our reports are published within 26 days, and there is a real focus on reports that are outside of that kind of median range for us to be assured that there's a clear rationale. And often it's a discussion with the provider around factual accuracy and that kind of piece of work. But we are holding steady at KPI at the moment on this.
I was waiting for John to come in, but he's not going to.
No, consistently within system parameters.
Very good, Kate. Thank you very much indeed. That takes us on to processes and time lost to because of IT issues. Mark, do you want to comment?
Yes, we've had a recent uptick in time lost to IT issues due to a couple of teething issues that we've had. One large one was with the migration of our SharePoint, of our files from an old file server into SharePoint. With all the regeneration work that we're doing around digital foundations, etc., we anticipate that this will be significantly improved, although that work is happening between now over the next 6 months. So would expect with the work that's going on that this would start to track down.
I mean, it struck me that the sort of the scale of the bar chart exaggerates the problem. I mean, given the scale of the change that you've been through, even the uptick is relatively modest. But on the bar chart, it looks like it's sort of gone a bit mad. But
absolutely, and it's a representation of kind of time lost, rather than a real cost.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Just to reinforce your point, Peter, if you look at this time last year, with the infrastructure that we had then as business as usual, what Mark and his team have done is they've migrated 4,000 email accounts onto Microsoft Office 365. I think it was something like 40 million files were migrated over the course of a weekend, and that was the consequence. So I think given what we've achieved over the last over the last 6 weeks or so, one would normally have expected a much greater disruption than is evident here. And actually, in a number of these cases, we were able to continue to work. This was not necessarily about the whole organisation stopping. So I think if you take this in the round, I think what this represents is a significant improvement in our capability from a technology point of view. And I think, as Mark describes, what you will see over the course of time is this really significantly reducing. If you recall, this chart was put in some years ago because of consistent outages across the infrastructure, consistent inability of inspectors to get into infrastructure over an extended period of time, and I don't think this really reflects that at all. But thank you.
No, good, thank you, and thanks to everybody that's delivered that. Finance we've probably covered, unless anybody wants to add anything. Takes us on to people and learning. Turnover. Yep. Sorry, I was just looking. I made myself a note, and I then had to open it to read it. But anyway, sorry, Kirsty.
I don't think there's. I think things are within the normal range. So if you look at our turnover, that's within the expected range, varying slightly around the 11, just under the 11%. But that's what we would expect. We want to keep a steady rate of turnover to refresh things. So I think that's good. Our vacancy factor is around where we would. We said it would be less than 5%. We use that to help manage budget variances within year, and that's about where we would expect it to be. There's nothing I'm particularly worried around there. And if you look at our sickness still is around our target. We have 3.7% sickness across the piece, which I think is pretty good, to be honest. I expect next month and the month after we'll see a slight peak with seasonal-ish flu and things like that, but at the moment sickness is where we'd expect it to be. Our people and learning, that's just a sort of showing that this is a combination of our mandatory training, our annual training, and also sort of mandatory training that people have to just do once across the piece. And again, I think where the key ones we want to keep an eye on in here is the training around our Fred's got the work around our values in terms of information security, and we keep a track on that to make sure that happens. We get that done, and we get the levels that we need to get in order to provide the assurance to the Information Commissioner, and that has to be completed by April next year, so that's on track. So that's what I wanted to say on that.
Thanks. Does anybody want to? John?
Thank you very much, Kirsty. I'm just looking at the turnover range, and I always regard turnover as a bit like the visible bit of the iceberg. And whilst it is within range, I also think there may be a rising trend amongst the operational directorates in turnover, and I just think it's worth us just noting and cautioning and keeping an eye on that in order that it doesn't go. And in a sense, vaguely related, and I'll ask it here, there is an annual survey which Mark and I asked for and which is going to come out. Do we know when that will come to board?
So the staff survey is open at the moment and is currently running until I think mid-December, and we anticipate we'll get early results in January. So I'm not entirely sure when that full analysis will have been done, it will come to the board, but I anticipate it'll be back end quarter of this financial year.
I mean, sorry, go on, Mark. Well, I was only going to just make the point that you're right, John, the devil is in the detail in this, but a 10% turnover rate implies an average length of stay in employment of 10 years, which in today's ways of working is very long. But
I don't want to make too much of it. It was the trend I was interested in.
And the devil is in the detail, because obviously if there's a particular area where that is, because the average is 11, then that would be an issue. So you're right. Rosie, were you going to comment on that, and then I'll bring Mark in?
Just to let you know that we've been doing a deep dive into our turnover because of the rising trend in the PMS Directorate. Quite a significant proportion of that is related to retirement, and we are monitoring that. So, and I think also it's probably a reflection that we've been running the programme now for 5 years or so, and sometimes that's a point where people want to change. So, but we are monitoring it on a regular basis.
Sorry, no, Mark, because yours is a different point. Okay, Mark, go on.
Chairman, just building on John's point, I just wonder whether it wouldn't be helpful for us to see once a quarter or some regular period turnover for service of less than 2 years. I mean, that's usually has some big spikes in it, and it would just be, I know we track this in the organisation, it would be good for the board just to see that. I do have another point, just in terms of the reducing the vacancy factor, Can you confirm, Kirsty, I know I've asked this before, but this excludes any of the portfolio posts. These are substantive positions in the
this is substantive and fixed-term appointments, so it will include some of the portfolio posts that are now on fixed-term appointments, but what it won't include is any positions that we have filled through contingent labour.
I suppose filling the positions through contingent labour is not quite the point that I'm trying to make. It's the ones we haven't filled through contingent labour, and whether we can have some track of that, especially in light of the new and I think very much improved people strategy.
Yeah, so we do track separately our portfolio posts, and we track the length of time to fill those posts, so we can see whether we're getting better or it's taking longer to fill particularly hard to fill posts. I haven't got the details in front of me, but I know we are making real improvements around how quickly we're taking to get people into those roles.
Thank you. I think it would be good if that could come to the subcommittee of ACGC on a regular basis.
Yeah, that's fine.
Good. Thank you. Kate.
So if I could just add to Rosie's point, I think for me what's interesting about the turnover when you get into the detail is the regional variability. So within ASC, I have one region that's way below this range, kind of down at 4%, two regions that are within range, and then I have one region, my south region, which is up at 16%. So for me, there's something about when we think about our people plan, our people strategy landing, that we understand that regional variation, but also to give board assurance around exit interviews and how we are compiling that information so that we're learning. So it might be that there will be a proportion of people that are leaving because of retirement. I know when I've spoken to some inspectors, they talk about going to work with providers and being able taking on that kind of quality role. So I think for me, it might be helpful for us to discuss at board how we're using that data when people leave the organisation to help us think about, do we need to be doing anything different in how we manage our staff.
All right. So we're happy then move on to the risk register, and I just asked Ian to just briefly comment on the three red-rated risk register items. Ian?
Thanks, Peter. I think there are three red-rated risks. I think, firstly, the market oversight risk. That's really a combination of making sure that we have the right skill sets within the team to make sure that we can be on top of the risk. But it's also, I think, a recognition of the long-standing concern we've had around the stability within the adult social care sector, and the fact that there is this ongoing risk that some hard to replace providers may fail, which is the core purpose of market oversight, to make sure that we do keep an eye on that on behalf of the people that use services. Change and improvement, that's really an issue which we've largely touched on earlier in the meeting around resourcing the change programs, and the fact that we have got a significant and fairly sophisticated program of change with a number of moving parts and a number of interdependencies within those moving parts. So clearly that is the risk of one part falling behind and then impacting on the rest of the program is also obviously significant. And finally, the general election. I think this is recognition that, again, because a number of our decisions have to be played through the Department of Health and Social Care and through wider government, things like sign-offs for business cases for investments. When government is in transition, as it is at the moment, that can sometimes lead to delays in some of the programs of change. So some of these risks actually interact with one another, but they would be the three red risks. Thanks, Peter.
Okay. So that then takes us on to internal audit. Does anybody want to ask anything or add anything? Okay. Oh. No. I want to whistleblowing. Yep. So whistleblowing. Yep, Ian.
We've got at the end of the deck. There's two pieces of work. One on whistleblowing, one on enforcement, and we've included those this month because I'm conscious that both of those topics are important topics that the board have talked about in previous meetings, and I thought it was worth just unpacking those topics in a bit more of a narrative form because my concern was that the graphical form that we usually use has its limitations in relation to some of the subtlety that sits behind these topics. So if I just say a few words on each of those topics, and then perhaps we can discuss them if necessary. But I think if I look at slide 6, I think what the first slide does in relation to whistleblowing is it shows a substantial year-on-year increase in people contacting us with information. So that's a 14.5% increase on last year, which is an increase which in and of itself was about a 10% increase on the previous year. There are a number of factors that we think might contribute to that. One of them is the fact that the more action we take and the more public action that we take as a result of whistleblowing, the more people that ring and talk to us because they believe that when they do ring us, then action will be taken. So there's a sort of the pump is priming itself, if you will. I think also we've launched a give feedback on care service this year, which is a completely revised version of our online feedback, and we do believe from the early results that we've seen that has made a very significant improvement on what's called the completion rate. So under the old system, about 10% of people that began the transaction actually completed it. That number is now 40%. So we very significantly increased the amount of information we're getting, and probably more importantly, the quality of that information in terms of the depth and the detail that people are now giving us is also significantly better. Largely because the service steps them through a series of quite clear explanations around why we need certain pieces of information. So I think that service is relatively new. It's been trialled over the summer period and is now live. So we are seeing, I think, a big increase there. So on slide 7, we talk about how we use the information that we receive from people, and this can sometimes be a source of some debate. But I think it is fair to say that a relatively small amount of information that we receive triggers an immediate inspection. So in other words, we hear something today, and we are going through and re-inspecting tomorrow. And that's to a large extent because an awful lot of what we receive is anonymous or it's partial information, so it's quite difficult sometimes to get to the bottom of exactly what's required. So we may need to go back and understand what's going on. About a fifth of the information that we receive is referred on to a more appropriate organisation, and again, these figures belie the fact that we have strong relationships with other professional regulators and other organisations and charities that we both feed information to, but also information comes to us from them as well. So if you go to a Citizens Advice Bureau and we talk about a concern around health, and it's appropriate for us for that information to come to us, they will feed that to us, and I think colleagues in Health Watch, as Robert will know very well, do exactly the same. So I think that relationship with other organisations is an important part of this story as well. We know that we do need to improve what we do. So there's again in the slide deck, there's a number of actions that we're taking around how we improve the overall experience of somebody that comes to talk to us. So at the moment, in order to try and preserve people's anonymity, we tend to not go back and build a relationship with them over the long term. And I think on balance, that's probably not the best situation. So I think what we'd expect to see is that when you do give us information, there's much more of a closed feedback loop, so you understand exactly what's happened, and we can start to encourage you to give us a level of detail which enables us to act more effectively. I think I'm just going to pause there in relation to whistleblowing and ask for questions, Peter, and then I'll say a couple of words around enforcement before we finish.
So on slide 7, it doesn't add up to 100%. It adds up to just over 80%. Do we know, is the sort of 20% that where we appear not to have taken any action, is that because what we were given was so imprecise that we couldn't take action, or is it that actually there are multiple whistleblowers for certain things. So the fact that it's led to a responsive inspection might not have been just the 2%, might have been rather more than the individual number of whistleblowers. Sorry, I didn't put that very well, but I couldn't make sense of the slide because there was 20% missing, and I should have given you notice of the question. I apologise.
I don't know. Chris may help.
I think part of it is not necessarily the entirety of the answer, the 18.5% that's not there. In the past, we've where the primary information is already known, we haven't then assigned it to the new information we've received. So I wonder if part of the answer is if it's a known issue, i.e. the whistleblower is referring to something that's already known and already been acted upon, it's not seen as that piece of information is not seen as a primary reason why we've inspected. But it's probably worth checking that.
So if we could look into it, because my concern wasn't that we hadn't acted on it because we just failed. My concern was, are we getting whistleblowing information that is so imprecise? We don't even work out which provider it refers to. I mean, I've sat in on some calls that, where actually we really struggled to or the call handler has really struggled to identify what the caller's actually phoning about. So I think it would just be good to know, because if it is that, then we need to think about whether there's another piece of guidance we need to give. Ted, you look as if you've got the answer.
No, I haven't got the answer to that, but there's something else I wanted to say. The overall figure of 2% that responsive inspections were triggered by whistleblowing or concern being raised hides the fact that in hospitals it's considerably higher than that. And I just wanted to stress, and I've said this to the board before, that people raising concerns, members of staff and patients, are a very important driver of our responsive inspections. And as I said earlier on, I'm keen to create more headroom to be able to do more responsive inspections going forward.
I agree, thank you. Liz?
Yes, I just wondered whether, in terms of the threshold for when we take action, I just wondered whether it's consistent across all types of service, or whether, for example, I mean, earlier we were talking about closed institutions, and I was wondering whether, a single alert about a closed institution might be more likely to trigger action than, say, a single, if you've only got one person raising a concern about a wider kind of service, that might not be of such immediate concern. I'm not sure. I just wondered if that plays into how we take those judgments.
I don't think it's as binary, if you will, in the sense that if somebody gives us information which is detailed and clear cut, that one phone call or that one inquiry through the online service will trigger an inspection. Equally, in other cases, if we know that something is of a concern, but not necessarily of but something that can perhaps wait a couple of weeks, and we know that we're going to do an inspection in a couple of weeks' time, then that piece of work, that information will be logged and contribute to the inspection. So there's a pretty sophisticated triaging process to look at at exactly what we're being told, and sometimes people will give us part of the information and we need to go back, and other times we're not able to go back, but two pieces of anonymous information that give us part of a story added to something else may lead to triggering. So there's an algorithm that the call handlers and the people in the service centre use to do this, but it's, I feel like, a lot more sophisticated than perhaps you were implying there.
Okay. I'm sorry, Robert, I beg your pardon.
Just firstly to welcome this, and to have this coherent level of information in the public domain, I think is very encouraging, as is the fact that people appears to be increasingly coming to us, which is a good thing, not a bad thing. I also welcome the idea we need to think more about our relationship with the people who talk to us. What I'm not sure I see here, but it may be implicit, but I'd like your confirmation as to what we do about it, is obviously some whistleblowers don't mind not being anonymous, being identified, and others inevitably are. And some of those, maybe a lot of them would feel then quite exposed in relation possibly to a bad culture from the place they're coming from. And while I absolutely understand it's, in a sense, not our legal duty to ensure protection, that's their employer, sometimes the employer is unable to do that. And I just wonder how we offer, if we do, or could do, just to monitor that situation, so to enable, so that if the whistleblower themselves have concerns about what's happening around them, they can come back to us and with some expectation that we will do something about that. Because there is a feeling, I think, among some people that these things happen and they're isolated and they're left in the lurch. And if that feeling gets abroad, then it will deter others from approaching us. So it's about the relationship we have with the whistleblower, who then, rightly or wrongly, begins to feel they're being discriminated against because of the whistleblower.
I think that's exactly the piece of work we're doing at the moment. I think what we've recognised is that some people will wish to remain anonymous because of the fear of all of the things you've just described. The problem that presents to us is sometimes what goes with that wish for anonymity is a slight obfuscation of the information they give us. So therefore, it's information which is difficult to act on as a consequence, and so. And the fact that we are if you like, a government body doesn't help, because they're not quite sure, particularly when they're dealing with other parts of government. It doesn't help. So what we want to try and do is get to a point where we can give people the confidence that when they do give us information, we will maintain its confidentiality as far as we can. But if they're giving us information where where harm is being caused, we will have to act on that. And if that indirectly exposes the whistleblower, then I think we have to try and manage that in the best possible way. But I don't think we can give people an absolute undertaking that we won't expose them indirectly. So there's a number of parts to this, I think. But I think the message, I hope that as a board you're hearing, is this is a topic that we're taking very seriously. And there are a number of pieces of work to try and address all of these multiple questions, because I think we've had a fairly simple approach to this thus far, and I want to make it to be a more sophisticated approach. I think that the thing that we need to be very cautious of is at the point at which we are building a relationship which takes that individual into a place where they become where they're giving us information on an ongoing basis, and we are targeting that information. We need to be cognizant of the Regulatory Investigatory Powers Act and all the obligations that brings with it. So we need to make sure that we don't accidentally start to create a group of people who are effectively covert human intelligence sources, to use the jargon.
So I think, Robert, your point was that having been exposed by because it's obvious who it was, then some people either actually are or certainly feel they're then victimised, and how can they be supported? And I suspect we need to well, I was going to say, to maybe have a better answer, I was going to say I think we just need to think very carefully about how they are supported, because I'm not. We have to be careful not to push our role into. So there may be a well-led aspect to this. But an individual case, I'm not sure it's for us, so we need to think very carefully about where we might send somebody. But Ted, you may have a better answer.
I'd agree with what you said. I mean, we don't have a role in becoming an advocate for that individual person, but there is a well-led context to this. And I think cultures that in organisations, leadership in organisations, that allow whistleblowers to suffer detriment because they've raised are things we need to challenge more openly. And I think as we're going through the process of looking at our well-led assessment framework with NHSI, I'm very hopeful we'll build in much stronger guidance about that into the assessment framework, because I think it is something that perhaps we have not stressed enough in the past.
Yes, I agree with everything everyone has said. The more that those who may be responsible for a toxic culture, or one which is thought to be one, believe that we're keeping an eye on the situation, and that's different from taking responsibility for the individual. The more the individual themselves will actually feel protected.
Okay, thank you. Let's reflect on. Ian, do you want to move on?
Yes, and just a couple of quick things on enforcement. Again, this is a topic which is probably more complicated than it may first appear. We covered a number of these points earlier on with Rebecca, but I think the general point that I wanted to make was, although there's been an overall rise in prosecutions over the last year, I think we do need to recognise that prosecutions can often, or investigations followed by prosecutions, can take more than a year and cross an annual boundary. So seeing an increase doesn't necessarily suggest that this is a material change in policy. So I'd caution against seeing any rise in 1 year as being significant in the long term. I think what we try and do in terms of enforcement policy is make sure that when we take enforcement action, it's proportionate in terms of its impact and the risk that we are taking enforcement action against. So we're constantly looking at our enforcement policy to check that it aligns with a clear definition of risk. So we're trying not to take enforcement action against things which do not have a particularly big impact. It's also worth just reminding everybody that in order for a piece of enforcement to take place, there's a sort of two-stage sequential process that we go through, which is, firstly, is there sufficient evidence of an offence within our remit to prosecute, and then secondly, is it in the public interest to pursue a prosecution for that offence, and it can sometimes take quite a long time to get to conclusion, because sometimes cases arrive with us from the coroner or from the police service, where it has taken 2.5 years to carry out their investigation. We have a maximum time period of 3 years to take enforcement action. So we may very well find that although a case may relate to an incident that occurred 3 years ago, actually we have only had a relatively short period of time to act on it, which may sometimes appear that when we see enforcement cases where the event took place some time ago, it's because it's been to another agency first to be investigated. So again, that's just something just to remind the board that sometimes it appears that these things take a long time. The amount of time we've actually been working on it in many cases can be quite modest.
Okay, are we done on the performance report? Oh, Chris, no, we're not done.
I was just going to say I've got an answer for the other under enforcement action from earlier on. So that's apparently it's where we've either escalated the original enforcement action for a higher enforcement action, or it's where it's been withdrawn.
Brilliant. We go to top of the class. Thank you, Chris. That's really helpful. Now we know. Good. So, anything else on performance? We move on to the change and people update, and I don't know whether, Jill, you want to come and have a seat, hot seat. Welcome, Jill. Kirsty, to you.
Thank you, Peter. So I will pick out some highlights from our change and improvement report. I will pick it up with, and then I'll hand over to Mark to talk around the digital bits, and then I'll come back to Jill to talk about the people, if that's okay. So just in terms of progress over the last quarter, we have been working quite closely with on our transformation engagement and strategy and vision piece, and we're now starting to socialise that with internal and external stakeholders over the next month to finalise that. We have made some really strong progress on a number of programmes and projects, and I'll come back to those in shortly. And we've also made some really good progress on acquiring the skills that we need to deliver on our transformation programme over the last month or so. So in terms of some of the projects programmes that we have in place, we have a new project called Transforming Our Organisation. We're starting to scope that one out. This project is to support the development, the implementation of our new strategy as we work forwards, and we're just in the process of scoping that out, bringing resources together to start to have that in place so that it can start to work alongside the work that we're doing on developing our strategy. Our regulatory platform, this is a piece of work to replace our current CRM. This one has a large digital contingent, and Mark, I'm sure, will talk a little bit more about that. We are seeing this really as a business change programme with a digital enablement capability around that. This piece of work is now currently going through our external approvals. And on through the Department of Health and Social Care, and this we are now starting to pull together the resources and the teams to start to move this really important piece of work forward. Our registration transformation programme is a multifaceted programme with a service design element, some leaning and QI work in there, as well as some wider work on operational improvement. We are continuing to build our new digital service. The first one of this is community care providers and new registrations. We're making really good progress with this. We've developed a new model office to really test out the work that we're doing on this area, and we hope this will be live into private beta early in the new year. Improving regulation today is a programme of work which is supporting the delivery of our current strategy and looking at how we can improve and target our regulatory interventions as we need to. We have two key areas of work in this space. One is looking at implementing the Mental Capacity Liberty Protection Safeguards Act that's coming forwards, and we're in the process of scoping that to really understand what that means for how we operate and how we work in our organisation. And the other one is some work that we're doing. We have 3 sandboxing pilots, regulatory sandboxing pilots in place to look at how we regulate new innovations in digital technology. And we have 3 sandboxes where we're working with providers, one on clinical digital triage, one on machine learning and diagnostic screening, and the other one on providing personal care. The other area of work, we have a number of standalone projects in our portfolio, but a really positive piece of work that we've been doing is around give feedback on care. So this is a new digital service to enable people to tell us about the care that they experience. We have been through the GDS process with this Government Digital Services and had really positive feedback on the work that we've done. This one is currently in private beta, and we are about to move in the new year to a public beta, which means that we will open that service to all users, which means more people will be able to tell us about their care using various different digital platforms. This has a positive benefit, as it will enable us to manage the information much more efficiently in our National Customer Service Centre, but also really enable us to support our intelligence gathering process, and the data will come in an easier way for us to feed that into our analytics platform. Our quality improvement programme is starting to really gain traction now. We have 14 people currently going through our gold training programme to support the implementation of quality improvement across the organisation. Alongside that training, we have 14 quality improvement projects that are starting to take place, and they will really start to hopefully drive out some improvements in our processes and systems and really deliver benefits quickly. We are also looking at starting to roll out our silver training programme, which is a programme to upskill people across the organisation to really start to be able to take quality improvement projects forwards at a local and directorate level to really start to drive that quality improvement culture and drive out some improvements and efficiencies at a local level. That's all I want to say on the change. I'm going to hand over to Mark, who'll pick up on some of the digital aspects of our change work, and then I'll go to Jill to talk about people, if that's okay.
Okay, thank you. So Kirsty mentioned about the regulatory platform, so we've now secured our internal approvals for this technology transformation programme, which will replace our current systems that will support our current regulatory activities, and we're now working through that external approval process, as Kirsty mentioned. This programme is very much aligned and working in partnership with the Transforming Our Organisation programme, and it will allow us to support business change, effectiveness, and deliver really significant system improvements for all of our colleagues. On the Intelligence-Driven Enablers programme, this will complement the regulatory platform and allow us to design future data structures that support our ambition to become truly intelligence-driven. And this programme's got several components. A lot of those are largely in the discovery phase, and some of those elements are in the early proof of concept phase. On our Digital Foundations programme, We've completed the rollout of our Office 365 and Teams implementation across the whole organisation, which really gives us significant new mobile, collaborative and productivity platform for all of our colleagues. And we've already received really great feedback across the organisation about how that's working for people. We'll shortly be extending that functionality to allow us to work with external parties as well, which will dramatically improve our ability to work with others around inspections. We've also completed a new corporate Wi-Fi implementation across the all CQC offices, which really helps our workers be able to work in a more agile way throughout the office environment. And on our procurement for new service desk application management and security services, those are all progressing very well as well. That's it from me.
Thank you. And finally, from me on the people agenda side. So we've highlighted in the paper some sort of key headlines and activities that I wanted to share with the board. This doesn't obviously cover off the business as usual activity that is underway across my directorate and across the organisation in terms of the people agenda. I alluded last month when I was here talking about the Pulse survey that I was pulling together a people plan. Work continues to progress on that. I think there are emerging a number of pillars which I've described, which will help us to really move towards the outcome of making CQC a great place to work. So sort of employee experience is at the heart of this, as well as sort of some key tools and levers that will help us shift that experience, whether that is reward and recognition or the capability of leaders and line managers, as well as really properly recognising how people have a voice in the organisation and how we properly listen to that voice. We've got some very sort of targeted work going on in terms of resourcing up some of the sort of the change agenda work that Mark and Kirsty have alluded to already. I'm not pretending that it's easy to bring in scarce skills given the sort of the parameters in which we work in terms of our salary boundaries, but we are doing our very best to think about the entirety of our attraction strategy as we're going out to market and hoping to think quite innovatively around how we can actually bring the right people in with the right skills to help us deliver the agenda that we've just heard of. The employee engagement agenda is obviously an important part of how we create a great place to work. How we are perceived to be listening to our staff and their feedback is vital to how we continue to build that. We talked about our Pulse survey at the last board session, so I won't rehearse that again. Our annual people survey, the full survey, is live at the moment. We've got a reasonable response rate and just under a week to go, so I'd expect, as is normal within all organisations, that we'll have a bit of a peak of activity at the end of the final period. And I know leaders around the table and in the organisation are really encouraging staff to have their say. We do generally have a really good response rate in this organisation, which is actually quite unusual. So we have people who work for us who are actively keen to share their thoughts, which is a great thing to do. And it's be particularly vital as we're approaching sort of the change agenda. We have a session later on diversity and inclusion, and I do think it is time that we frame this in an organisation-wide strategy which actually identifies a handful of things that we do really, really well and build on. So we've been working quite closely with the networks on this and building on their experiences and successes to date. But I think pulling things together is going to be really important to actually start to make a difference, and setting ourselves some quite aspirational and therefore quite difficult targets and measuring our progress against those. The work we've been doing on wellbeing, I'm seeking to embed into business as usual. This is just an integral part of how people experience a great day at work, and offers some tools and techniques for people to understand how they can give of their best and search for those where they are having particular difficulties. And I've highlighted very quickly 3 of a number of capability building and development interventions that we're focusing on at the moment. Firstly, around professionalising sort of some of our regulatory skills, which is a sort of significant piece of work, and it shifts us forward, gives people an accreditation which we've never had before. So sort of rolling that out and then considering how we might embed that further. Equipping some of our line leaders and managers in coaching skills to enhance the performance management conversations that are happening throughout the organisation feels really important. So we'll be capitalising on the success of that, and really sort of targeting our sort of the bottom end of our talent pipeline to identify those colleagues that we have that are our future leaders, and demonstrating how we can both identify them, develop them, and then I think the critical next step in terms of our talent agenda is how we then deploy them across the organisation so that they get stretched, but also we get the benefit of them having really high potential and a development that we've invested in. Just finally, we've got some exciting stuff going on in the future. So we're about to embark on a cultural inquiry, which will help us to really build a rich picture of the culture at all levels and across all aspects of the organisation.
So, not much going on then, Kirsty. Seriously, before opening it up, I just would congratulate you and your teams for the energy and the drive that's going into all of this, and some quite considerable successes, Mark. I think the Office 365 rollout's been particularly good and will both enhance people's experience at work but also improve our productivity, so it's a win-win, and lots of good stuff going on everywhere. So, well done, everybody. Now, I'll open it up and you'll get, no doubt, questions and comments. Mark, do you want to kick off?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Kirsty. Thank you, Jill. Looking at the people plan, I tried to compare this to our old HR strategy, and I must say I think what you produced as a framework is strategically much more aligned, much tighter, and really looks good. I think the move to change resourcing is a critical move for us. I've already mentioned it before as to how we bring these difficult roles to recruit on board. It's very good to see diversity and inclusion and well-being being maintained and at the forefront of the people plan. Seems to me you've moved from workforce strategy and learning organisation to building capability, and I think that's much better focus. But with Farah here especially, I think it's important that building capability is for all of our people across the organisation. So I think it's really good from a strategic point of view. Just a couple of an observation and a question. I think the framework, the plan, will get much more traction once we have some very specific KPIs attached to it. So I know we've discussed that before, and I look forward to the development of that. Just in terms of within the presentation, the building capability, talking about the coaches and the work they've been doing, and I noticed that we make the point there that the coaches program has been in place for quite some time now, sort of halfway through. I met some of the coaches when I was up in Newcastle. I was really impressed with them, but I wonder if we're tracking any potential productivity gains out of that. So I'm thinking things like reduced turnover, greater job satisfaction, engagement, quicker issue resolution, more effective team working, fewer grievances. I just wonder if we've got any way that we're tracking that investment that we're making in coaches. Thank you.
Jill, do you want to answer? There was quite a lot of points in there.
Thanks, Mark. I look forward to continuing our conversation around KPIs. I think you're absolutely right. Once we get a plan that sits underneath this framework, which is a delivery plan with some hard measures in there and some milestones, that's my next stage, and that's kind of what I want to take through to the executive team shortly. And on the point about tracking the impact of our coaches, so I think there's a sort of, does that make them as individual employees more efficient and effective, but also the impact of their coaching. So in part, I think it's a little difficult to track all of it because some of it will be very confidential, and they are still coming to the end of their programme, but I can certainly take away and work a look at. And I'd expect for those coaches who are line managers, we would see locally sort of an increase in terms of employee satisfaction through our regular surveys, but I'll certainly take it away.
Anything? Oh, John.
Jill, thank you very much. And just a request, really. Part of the reason we asked for the annual survey was so that we could have an effective comparator with the previous one. So when the analysis is being done, I wonder if you'd be good enough to bear that in mind so that we have that comparison.
Farah.
Thanks very much, Jill. From a network perspective, we really welcome a diversity and inclusion framework at CQC, and seeing this and the wellbeing strategy right at the heart of the people strategy is the people plan, I should say, is really good to see. For us, I think that the word ambition there and being ambitious is really important. We want to know more about what aspirational targets mean, and we hope to see real tangible change over time. We know there's a long-term plan, but we'd like to see things happen sooner as well. We know that a lot of work's been done in the past couple of years, and so having long-term targets is really good. Having short-term targets is really important as well. So thank you so much.
Okay, we're done on that. So before we come to the public, is there any other business anybody on the board wants to raise? Oh, RGC, I beg your pardon. There was some other business you wanted to raise. It just happens to be on the agenda. Sorry, Liz. RGC.
Yeah, so we had a Regulatory Governance Committee meeting yesterday. The main topic we focused on was what do we know of the impact that CQC has, both so that we learn from that in our ongoing work, but also that we use that knowledge of how we best have impact to inform our strategic plan for 2021 onwards. And what we were presented with was a really helpful framework of 8 different levers that regulators can use, things like being directional, telling people what they have to do, or anticipatory impact, people knowing what's expected and therefore doing it themselves. And we took a bit more of a, well, first of all, we gave a steer, I think, to the effect that it would be good to think more explicitly about how we use these different levers in terms of how we prioritise our activities, both in next year's, in the coming business plan and in the strategic plan going forwards. We took a deeper look at relational impact. That's the relationship between CQC and providers, which can be very significant in encouraging improvement. And the steer we gave there was really that that it may be worth doing some more work on the frameworks and the training that underpin the activities of our colleagues, so that they can use the full range of different approaches to the relationship that are most effective in different circumstances. We also looked at our content and our products and the impact that those can have, including through partnerships and third parties, where, for example, our content might then be tailored by somebody else for a particular audience in order for it to make most difference on the ground to them. We looked a bit also at the conditions in which we have impact and how we can use our independent voice, for example, to encourage changes amongst other players in the system that might make it easier for our impact to land. That all that steer went through into the people preparing the strategic plan and indeed business planning. We also looked at the risk register, and we've now agreed with the ACGC that we in the Regulatory Governance Committee will own, so to speak, a subset of the risks, those that are most concerned with regulatory risk. So we looked at those and we identified a number of issues that we want to do a deeper dive on in future meetings. And we've got some deep dive issues coming up, including in primary medical services area. And all the risks that we looked at yesterday in that area were amber, and we've already looked at the risk register today.
So thank you for not letting me miss you out, because it was a really thought-provoking discussion yesterday. It's good that you shared the highlights with colleagues who weren't in the meeting yesterday. So thank you. Now, is there any other business from the board anybody wants to raise? If not, that's the end of the meeting. That takes us, though, to questions from the public, and I've been notified of 4 people who want to ask questions. We've got about 10 minutes, so if I could ask people asking the questions to be fairly concise, and if I could then ask my colleagues to try and be fairly concise in their response, we'll get through all 4 questions. Taking them in the order in which they came to me, Robin, I think you're first, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Robin Pike. I'm now an independent member of the public. I'd like to ask what plans there are to upgrade the CQC website, and I'm asking the question within the context of a search which I did yesterday for key lines of inquiry, which yielded 4,029 results. The first of these was Nigel's surgery 68, areas looked at on inspection, brackets, key lines of inquiry. I did ask, Chairman, a similar question about a year ago, and I had a very similar response from the search.
Chris, I think this is one for you.
Yeah, it is. I mean, the search that you did speaks to the problem of the current website. We're trying with one site to, I think, service both people who use services, providers and other stakeholders. What our intention is to try to make it clearer who the information is for. So 2 things that we're doing at the moment to speed up. One we talked about quite a lot today. One of the poorest performing areas of the site was the give feedback on care, share your experience form. And that's the first thing, the thing I wanted to improve the fastest. I was getting the most feedback from colleagues at Healthwatch, but also colleagues from other organisations, is that is a major barrier to people engaging with us. So that was the important first step that we wanted to take. The next area, which sort of speaks to part of your question, is the guidance that we provide for providers and actually for other people as well. There is too much guidance at the moment, and it is duplicative. So what we're trying to do by sector is to have a review of that guidance, to streamline that guidance, and also to change the nature of the guidance. So it's written if you've seen some of the guidance, it can be written in quite a sort of hard to understand tone. What we're trying to do is to make it more accessible to everybody, for people who use services and for those providing them, but fundamentally to reduce the amount of that guidance. My ambition is so that you can type into the page where it's about guidance, it's for providers, and you can type in a key word and it will pull up the guidance that we have that relates to it, and also the best practice. So our ambition isn't to replace the website like for like, but actually to build services for providers, to build services for the public. The share experience, just to give you some comfort, the share experience one is probably was seen as an exemplar by I think colleagues talked about it earlier, and it was seen as an exemplar by DHSC in terms of how it developed and the way in which it developed. Our intention is to use the same people and the same process to use for the other services that we want to develop.
So we'll see you in a year's time, Robin, but progress. So is Miss Lander here? Would you like to come and have a seat? Malta, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. My name is Nicole Lander, and I have 2 parents currently receiving care at home. Clipping is the colloquial term used by individuals who provide care to the elderly in their own homes. when a planned visit of, say, 1 hour is clipped or is cut short and the carer leaves early before the contracted hour, for example, has been worked in its entirety. When this is done on a regular basis with a large number of clients, clipping will inevitably be financially beneficial to the care company because it's being paid for care that isn't happening. So more importantly, this practice may well result in safeguarding issues and have fraud implications. So the questions are in 4 parts, Mr. Chairman, and if we can't answer them all today, I'm happy to receive a written response. How does the Care Quality Commission monitor the practice of clipping? What percentage of at-home care providers use digital systems, which is clocking on and off, which may prevent clipping versus manual systems, which are inevitably more open to fraud? What plans does the Care Quality Commission have to insist that all at-home care providers use digital systems, and also to mandate that carers stay for their contracted hours? And finally, in the CQC's experience, how many councils have successfully prosecuted care providers for clipping following inspections or interventions? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Kate, I don't know whether you can answer all of that, but have a go.
I will give it a go. So thank you so much for your question. So I suppose I just want to start off with what our remit is and then note that there are other parties that have responsibility with this as well. So our job is to ensure that people are receiving high quality, person-centred care. When we go out and inspect individuals, we have conversations with them, as do our experts by experience, about how they're receiving that care. Are they being supported by people who know how they need their care delivered? Are they not rushed? Are they given the time that's required to ensure that they have their needs met? We also have conversations with staff, so we would have conversations with care workers on their own, so not necessarily in a place where their managers might be there, again to ask about what their arrangements are to ensure that they have the time they need to deliver the care that they are being commissioned to do so. So that is our job, very simply about ensuring that people are getting the care that they need. There's a couple of other pieces of it. One component is how this care has been commissioned. So it's not a particular issue in the way that you've just described it, but we know that NICE issued guidance a little while ago that talked about personal care visits not being less than 30 minutes. So there is some guidance out there available to commissioners to make sure that they are buying units of care that's sufficiently long for people to get good person-centred care. And then there's responsibility of providers. So in the case you described, commissioners are doing their job, so they're buying suitably length periods of care for the people to have their needs met. But if providers are not delivering that, then it becomes a contractual issue and, as you say, a potential safeguarding if people aren't having their needs met. So just on a couple of other things, so it's not our job to be prescriptive about how providers deliver their care. We look at the outcome of the care that people receive, and we wouldn't be in a position to insist on what that should look like. But just as a slight side note, because of the emerging role of digital care records, so the social care sector is moving at a great pace now with thinking about digital care records. We had a workshop yesterday with some providers as well as some inspectors to think about developing some guidance about how we should be using those digital care plans when we go out and inspect. And the other thing I'd just say, and it might come up at a later question, but we've also recently issued a publication called Driving Improvement Through Technology, where we highlight and celebrate where tech is enabling people to have good quality lives. So that's the role we take. We shine a spotlight on where it's working well, but we don't insist providers have to have X bit of kit in place to ensure that they're doing their job.
Thank you very much. That's
no,
great.
thank you for a very interesting question.
Thanks.
And that does segue, I think, neatly, David, into the question that I think you're likely to ask.
David Hogarth. I'm from Neighbour Care St John's Wood and Maida Vale. Not every family in the country is as concerned about their parents as Miss Lander obviously is. And there is a great deal of a lot of the people I visit, I deal with are foreigners, and they're sometimes amazed at how little children have to do with their families. I think one of the reasons for this is that in this country there are great distances sometimes between families and their parents. And a great distance doesn't mean that you're in Edinburgh, one is in Edinburgh and the other is in London. It can mean that somebody is in Watford or Croydon and the other is in central London.
And that's a problem which will not go away. But technology can help with this. And I'm wondering what the CQC could do to encourage the spread of the kind of technology which would keep parents and their children in touch with each other, even if they are far apart.
So, David, we're in violent agreement that technology has a really big part to play in keeping people in contact with their friends and family, and it's really important. Just to remind you, you know this, the CQC's remit does not extend to people who are living independently and not receiving care. So a very large number of the people you're talking about would just be outside our remit, so we can talk more generally, but it falls outside. But let me just ask Kate to comment on what we are doing for both home care and domiciliary care, which is in our remit. Kate.
Thank you. So as I responded to the other person earlier, I think we have an important job about shining a spotlight on where this is working well. I think our trade associations have a big role to play in this. So as to many of our colleagues, I often go out and visit services, and I visited a service where they were using electronic care planning on the mobile device. So as the care worker was delivering support, they were updating the care record. But those residents had also given permission for their family to access the app. So there are examples where a family member on an hour-by-hour basis can see, oh, mum's got up and been washed. Oh, mum's now doing an activity with her friends in the dining room. So there is, and what they described is they described improved relationships between the provider and family. They described a reduction in complaints because the family had a better idea about the support that they were getting. So there are a whole host of benefits that come from that I think our providers, there's an appetite within our providers to share that best practice amongst themselves, because they're seeing kind of improvements in relationships that other providers might benefit from as well.
So, Bren, if you can talk very quickly, the last word goes to you.
Peter, you know that's not true. The last word always goes to you, really, but I'll take your point, really. Very quickly, really. Peter, thanks for the way you chair this, and also that's about, for me, demonstrating values, cultures, etc., really. So let me start by saying that, really. One or 2 points, really. First and foremost, can we look to intensify how we promote our alerts that we sent out about reports that are published or there for CQC? I think I've seen it a couple of times and whatever, really, but I think that's a really great example, again, about actually reaching out and whatever, really. So I'm aware afterwards a couple of reports and whatever, because I haven't signed up to the alerts and whatever, I'm finding out secondary, really. So I think there's a really great opportunity going forward with our digital plan, etc., really. So that's the first one, really. Also, really, about when we're actually carrying out inspections. Now, I know there's a risk around that and whatever, so I'm not unaware of that, really. But again, really, who do we rely on? Who will say we are having this inspection at a care home, etc.? So as CQC, can we look at being more proactive around how we get these messages out and whatever to community groups, voluntary sector, etc.? I mean, I think those networks are there as whether or not we're tapping into them as well as we should do, really. The other bits and whatever, we did a little bit of work on NHS supported employment fair, really. When we spoke to those children, I spoke to the children about CQC, they were really interested in whatever, really. So again, let's see how we connect with our schools as well. From today, and also I sent through to 2 people around this board, really, about acronyms. You know, I lost count, really, after about double figures, the amount of acronyms that are spoken at the board. We really do need to know and listen to that, really, because that is a powerful turner off, and also a powerful turner off as well, really. We need to have a look at how we proof our reports before they go forward. And also we need to look at the language, because again, this is being put out for multiple audience to read, and acronyms can be actually a barrier to actually understanding. We picked that up in some of the reports ourselves anyway, really, and it's not something I haven't mentioned before.
So, Bren, thank you for your kind comments, and thank you for all that you do in the communities in which you work. I mean, it really is fantastic. Chris, I don't know whether you can cover at least some of what Bren's asked.
First of all, Bren, thanks for your comments, and they're really well made around our reports. The part of the value of the report is making sure people are aware of them and know about them. There are a couple of services. You mentioned one, which is where you can, if you go onto a page of the website, you can sign up to the reports for that individual organisation. I think as well, it's important that we can talk to people locally, so groups. So we work with colleagues in Health Watch, we work with colleagues in other organisations to share both what's happened and also what is happening. And I think there's more we can do in that space, absolutely, to encourage more people to engage with the reports. We're also doing some work to improve the quality of the reports. And I think Ted mentioned it earlier. There are parts of this which is a narrative description of what we found, and there's some data and evidence and acronyms that sit behind that. I think it's important we can get the right message about what we think about an organisation onto a few pages. So some work that we're doing there. One of the things that's important, and we mentioned it earlier on in the conversation, particularly for reports where we've got concerns, is how we advise the public and people who use services earlier. So the work, particularly in hospitals, around the letter which comes out to an organisation, it's important that we can make that available, and we do make it available to people. But I think there's more we can do in this space, and I think some of the work we want to encourage around local systems means that people can see not just one service, but then what's happened in their local area. And I think that's one of the pieces of work that we're looking to put in place as part of the website redevelopment.
One thing I forgot to do really is take the opportunity to thank Chris, Malt and Kate for personal act of kindness, which I'll take in the private meeting.
So thank you for that. And bearing in mind your point about acronyms, Bren, can I just say TTFN, BW? And that's the end of the meeting. Thank you all very much indeed.